Hello. I'd like to go over the slides in this deck to introduce a number of concepts about project management and ideas about project management that will give us sort of a common base for for the rest of the semester. So the first question is a simple question: what is a project? So here's a definition, the classical definition of a project. A project is a temporary undertaking meant to create a unique product, service, or result for the organization. The most important aspect of a project is that it's an activity designed to produce a valuable output for the organization, and it's an activity that has to be done within a defined period of time. So there is, if you will, an element of value creation and also an element of importance and urgency. It has to be done within a defined period of time with defined resources. So when we talk about a project, what kind of project? Here are some examples. We are all very familiar with those kinds with projects. Here is a list here, a new product, a new service, change, organizational change, a new structure, a new information system, a research effort, etc., etc. All of these share the attributes of being well-defined, to be completed within a period of time, and meant to produce value for the organization. So because it's important to think not just of the project itself, but the benefit that the project creates for the organization, you always have to understand and define the project in a context of the organization in which it takes place. This is what I call the systems view of projects. Projects do not exist by themselves. A project with the same definition in organization A will actually have a very different, will be realized and executed in a very different way in organization B, even though the projects will be defined in the same way in both organizations. Because the context is different, they will be done differently and in fact might produce results that are different. So we can think of projects as the means by which organizations execute their strategy and seek to achieve their strategic objectives. Obviously, not all projects are strategically important, but somehow, to the extent that an organization devotes resources to a project, there's always a strategic justification behind it, and it's always useful for the project leader to understand what that strategic justification is. But then there are a large number of projects that are in fact strategic projects, meaning that they are significant in and of themselves, and the relationship to strategy is well understood. So for a project leader to be effective, it is critical that he or she understands the context, the strategic context in which the project is being undertaken. Here is a diagram that tries to summarize at a very high level what I just said. In any organization, be it a for-profit business or not-for-profit social service organization or any kind of organization, there really are sort of three levels that we can look at. There's a level of the vision and mission, which is really the raison d'être, the reason why the organization exists. What is it that we exist to do? What mission do we are we pursuing? What vision do we have of the organization and its impact on society at large? That is really the job of senior management, of the board of directors, of the organization, to define what that is. And from that definition of a vision and a mission for the organization, senior management produces a strategy which is essentially the path or the set of actions that will enable the organization to realize the vision that it has and accomplish the mission that it gave itself. The execution of strategy, in other words, making it real, turning it into real concrete results, is the responsibility of what I call the operating management, the people who are actually doing the job on the ground. And the execution of a strategy is done, so the strategy is executed through a set of projects, which I call strategic projects, but or programs when they are large collection of projects, and so that's the relationship that exists between strategy and projects. However, because projects are significant in terms of their ability or the means by which strategy is executed, it's really extremely important not to end the work of a project when the project is completed. It's from the project that the organization is able to learn whether its execution is done competently and efficiently, whether its strategy is working, and in fact, whether its vision and mission is realistic and doable. And that's what I call the monitoring and control function, which is not, you don't have a vice president of monitoring and control in organizations. What you have is activities that are carried out by people at various levels in the organization of monitoring and controlling what has been done in order to learn from it so that we can adjust. So basically, based on the result and output of project, we can determine whether in fact the execution was effective. We did well, we met deadlines, we produced the result that we anticipated or not. And if not, then maybe we need to fix our operating mechanisms. We need maybe more training, maybe rethinking how we execute. Or it could be that, in fact, even though the projects were well executed, they did not really produce the results anticipated, which therefore means that our strategy might not have been quite right. So from what we learn, based on what we learn from the project, we can then determine that in fact the strategy needs to be adjusted, or maybe in fact completely rethought. And it can go even to the levels of vision and mission. In other words, we may be able to effectively execute strategy, but in fact, we are not able to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of mission and vision of the organization. In other words, the organization is trying to do something that's just not doable. So that's the importance of the learning from projects, is that it allows us to evaluate both our operating capabilities at the level of execution, our strategic capability at the level of strategy definition, and at even a higher level, whether in fact the mission and vision we have chosen for ourselves is one that we can pursue. So let me move on. Here I have a few quotes that I would like you to look at. The first quote is from NASA, from their rule book on projects, and NASA says that a review of problems with most failed projects indicates that the disasters were well planned to happen from the start. The seeds of problems are laid down early. Initial planning is the most vital part of a project. That's NASA rule number 15, and it's very clear. You have to invest a great deal of time and energy in developing the right plan for your project. And yet Helmut von Moltke, a famous Prussian general who famous for having defeated the French in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, Or more recently, Mike Tyson, heavyweight champion and well-known American philosopher, they both say, that's not what you do. Von Moltke said, no battle plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And Tyson more practically says, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. So, so what they're saying is that, yes, you have a plan, but the plan has to be adjusted, has to be adapted, has to be changed as you get involved in the nitty-gritty, in the meat of your project, because things happen that you could not anticipate in your plan. And that's really the dynamic that takes place in managing project. You have to follow the NASA rule, have a plan, invest in that plan. But then as you begin to execute on your plan, you have to be very open to changing and adapting in light of new information and new event. Sticking to the plan too closely can be just as damaging as not having a plan and changing too quickly. That balance is part of the talent and competency of effective project leaders. The last point is from Napoleon. To win is not enough. It is necessary to profit from success. The point here is that we are very good at learning from mistakes, learning from failure. We look back, we see what we did wrong, and then we learn the lesson and we try not to repeat it as we go forward. But with success, we tend to be much more complacent. We tend to say, well, it worked, therefore let's do it again. We tend to say, let's just repeat what we did since it was successful before. And that's dangerous because we may be successful despite ourselves. We may have made mistakes that somehow did not cost us. We may have been lucky, but more importantly, the reason for our success is tied to the context in which we made the decision, and each project is different. So what worked for project A may not work for project B, and if we don't understand what we did to succeed in project A, we may not be able to make the changes necessary to succeed in project B. So learning from success is just as important as learning from failure, and that's really the point that Napoleon is making here, and it's an important point to keep in mind in project management. Moving forward, then, I want to focus a little bit on the role of the project manager, and first let me make a qualification here, I tend to use interchangeably the term project manager and the term project leader. Traditionally, in the management literature, we define management as being doing the right thing, and we define leadership as management as doing things right, and leadership as doing the right things. In other words, a manager is somebody who is very good at applying existing protocols, existing procedures, existing processes, existing rules. He's efficient. He or she is efficient in their job. The leader is somebody who does the right thing. In other words, uses judgment and to determine whether things should be done and how they should be done. So any management job has a balance of management in the traditional sense and leadership in this sense as well. So that's a distinction that's not hard and fast. But I think, to my mind, managing project is more of a leadership role in the sense that it integrates judgment in addition to effective use of tools. So it's more leadership than just management. Having said that, the project manager, and that's where the concept of leadership comes in, is caught between the proverbial rock and the hard place. The rock is the organization as a whole, which is looking for certainty and predictability. I mean, that's a legitimate concern. Organizations need to have some degree of certainty in what they're going to do. They need to have a budget. They need to know have a pretty good idea of how things are going to work out. How they can't just sort of um, live from one day to the next. There have to be some context, some stability to the organization, and that's what upper management looks for. But the projects are very dynamic. Things happen beyond the control of the manager, of the project manager. There's a lot of contingencies, a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going on. We're learning from as we go. And these are the two realities. The project manager must, be very, very effective at this sort of very uncertain world within the project, and yet present some degree of predictability to his or her superiors to whom he or she is accountable. So here's an illustration of this situation where the upper management, the broader organization is at the top, the big green predictability box at the top, and the project dynamic change is the other one at the bottom, with the project manager in between, who must balance those two realities. These both are legitimate. Both. It is important for upper management to have some degree of expectation in terms of time, budget, quality of projects. They have to have some understanding, some comfort that it's going to be within the schedule and the budget and the specifications agreed or decided at the beginning. And yet, as we get into the project, as Mike Tyson told us, we have to adjust, change our plans, respond to the dynamics of the context, and we have to be creative. We have to adapt. We have to be opportunistic, etc., etc. That's the job of the project leader: is to balance those two realities, that tension between the two. And effective project leaders do that successfully, and that's how you bring about successful projects, or you bring project to successful completion. Here is next slide is another illustration of the sources of uncertainty. At a very high level, a project is about producing something, a product, a service, some result, which is either totally new, we've never done it before, or something we know how to do, we've done it before. So that's the horizontal axis, left to right. And it's using a process or a methodology to do it. Either we know how to do it, or we have to invent it, develop it as we go, and that's the vertical axis from top to bottom. So if you look at the upper left, the green box in here, this is producing something we know how to do, that we do it all. We've done it many times before, like assembling a car or whatever. Things we know how to do, and we know what it is. We know what it looks like at the end, and we know how to do it. So there are very few assumptions we need to make. There's a very high knowledge. We are very much in control. So if you go back to the slide before, the big box above, the one with the world of predictability, that's pretty much where we are. We can pretty much make very, very strong commitment in terms of schedule, in terms of budget, in terms of quality, and be pretty confident that we will deliver. On the other hand, if you look at the bottom right, and the best example there is a research and development project. For example, if you're in pharmaceuticals, trying to develop a new drug, you don't really know what it's going to look like, what we're going to find at the end. We just know in general that there's a result we want to get, but we don't know what the actual product, service, or artifact that we're going to come out at the end, what it's going to look like. And we don't really necessarily know, as we start, don't necessarily know how we're going to go about it. We're going to kind of learn and develop a methodology as we go. So that bottom right box, the red box here, lots of assumptions. We have to make a lot of assumptions, very, very relatively low knowledge as compared to the green area. And therefore, the commitment that we have to make to time, schedule, specs, this is much looser. And if management, upper management, hold us accountable, if we're down there on the bottom right, if they hold us accountable in the same way as they would if we were in the upper left, it's a recipe for failure. And then the two yellow ones, the off-diagonal one, process known, new product, or process unknown, old product, these are sort of in between, where the level of assumptions, or the number and quantity of assumptions is lower. There's more knowledge, and again, it's a balance between the two. So that sort of, at a high level, gives you a sense of the sources of uncertainty and in projects, and you can sort of position yourself in there and get a sense of where you are with your project. Assumptions are are an important element, because the less we know, the more we have to assume. And the more we assume, the more assumptions we make, the more we need to test them to make sure that they are correct, and if they are not, to change them as we go. Okay, let's move on to the next slide.